Hi, I'm Simon K. Jones, and today's audio version of the newsletter is going to be referencing some visual stuff, so you might want to have the actual newsletter open at the same time from your inbox or over at simonkjones.substack.com. Because today's about how developing your style can't be rushed. And this all came about because I listened to the latest episode of Brad Geiger and Dave Kellett's Comic Lab podcast. It's all about developing your own art style, and I highly recommend listening to this podcast regardless of whether you're actually involved in making comics at all, because a lot of the advice they give is relevant to anyone who is creating anything, really. They're kind of like a fabulous guide to being an online creator in 2025. So do give them a listen. The main point in the latest episode was that developing your own style is not something that can be rushed. You can't magically develop it overnight. And copying a pre-existing style, like looking at other artists, that might be possible if you're technically accomplished to do it, but it still won't be yours. So I've produced a huge amount of written material over my life, and especially in the last decade since I started serialising stories every week. Hundreds of thousands of words of fiction and non-fiction, and that's without counting the copywriting from the day job. I'm confident in my writing voice, basically, in large part because I've just done a lot of it. But that's not what I'm focusing on as an example here. So instead I'm considering my attempts to be a better illustrator, which are in very early stages. I'm still trying to figure out my visual style, and it's an interesting process to go through, having sort of already done that with my writing and now having to kind of go back to the drawing board with the visual side of stuff. A lot of what I figured out along the way I suspect applies to any creative pursuit, be it drawing, writing, composing music or anything else. And if you do check out the newsletter version, just be warned that I do share a lot of my amateur drawings. View at your own risk, I guess. So the sheer amount that I've typed out has resulted in my own style emerging, eventually. It's very difficult for me to describe that style, of course, but presumably my regular readers can identify a Simon K. Jones story compared to, say, a Naomi Alderman story, or pick another author. I'm reasonably confident that when I write fiction or non-fiction, I'm writing in my unique voice. It shifts and changes per project, of course. A Day of Faces is different to The Mechanical Crown and No Adults Allowed, but they're all very much me. That has to be a thing that exists, because otherwise my sort of regular continuing readers wouldn't choose to read it. There's something there, basically. This wasn't always the case. In my teens and 20s, my stories would just read like I was trying to mimic other writers. I'd write robot stories in the style of Asimov, or attempt to do hard sci-fi in the style of Kim Stanley Robinson. I wonder sometimes whether we all start out as writers of fan fiction, because in the very beginning all we can do is replicate what we have read, whether we mean to or not. But at some point all the accumulated technical skill and story inspiration we've absorbed from other writers and the world in general combines and filters through our particular brains to form a new style. And at that point you've become definitively you. My drawing is another matter. I'm very new to illustration, other than sketching out basic comics as a kid. I've always dabbled and sketched little bits and pieces here and there, but I'm absolutely a beginner. And listening to the Comic Lab podcast made me realise how I'm still really at the beginning of a new journey, which is an exciting place to be, but it requires starting from scratch. Once Tales from the Triverse wraps up later this year, in theory, hopefully, I think I'm on target, my next project is most likely to be comic related, which is why I've been quietly trying to improve my drawing ability in the background. Landing on a style for my drawing has been the challenge, partly because I didn't really know what that even meant from a visual perspective. I know what I like, and have artists that I admire. Chris Foss, Mobius, Jamie McKelvey, Dave Gibbons, Andrew Wildman, Norm Connew, N.D. Stevenson, Daniel Warren Johnson. Concept artists and comic artists feature a lot on my list. But then there's also all the classical stuff, the sort of thing you see on the wall of the National Gallery or the experimental projects in the Tate Modern. So many influences, and it's all interesting. It all kind of goes into the brain, but I've never really understood how any of that relates to what I want to do. If I read a book by an author I enjoy, I can immediately learn from what they're doing, observing and picking apart their approach. That's not been the case with visual art, for me, so far at least, and that gulf in expertise has been frustrating at times. I think perhaps I expected to be good at art because I was good at writing, which clearly makes no sense. It's a humbling experience to go from something you're very comfortable doing to an entirely new and unknown skill set. Somewhere along the way, I got a bit lost. Reading something like The Wicked and the Divine and adoring it, I wanted to be able to draw to that standard. In order to tell comic stories as compelling as Kieran Gillen, I thought I needed to be able to draw as expertly as Jamie McKelvey. The problem, obviously, is that nobody can draw like Jamie McKelvey except Jamie McKelvey. Okay, I thought, it's not that I want to replicate McKelvey's style. That would be pointless, but what it is that I want to be able to draw in a realistic style. For the kinds of stories I wanted to write, I needed to have realistic human faces and bodies, anatomically convincing and consistent in design. And for a long while that became a brick wall. I'm simply nowhere near being sufficiently skilled to pull it off, basically. Nowhere near. Ludicrously far away, in fact. As Brad and Dave point out in their podcast, I was trying to skip to the end without putting in the work. I mistakenly thought that this meant I couldn't make comics. The breaking down of that mental wall, perhaps inevitably, also involved Kieran Gillen. So here's a quote from a Blue Sky tweet? Blue Sky? What do you call blue skies? I don't know what they're called. Anyway, here's something he posted on Blue Sky. And quote, "Even if you just want to write comics, this is still true. Execute a comic any way you can. Writing to get the best from an artist who has limitations is literally the job. If it's you and you can't draw at all, that's absolutely it. How can you do a comic? Look at dinosaur comics, XKCD, etc." End quote. I'd been so determined to mimic the quality of a Gillen McKelvey comic, was aiming so absurdly high that I'd been sabotaging my own progress. Looking through my art folder, and you'll find countless appalling attempts at drawing semi-realistic human heads from my own imagination. For a time, I then thought I'd found a way forward using photographic reference. Turns out I can copy a photo without any problems. Maybe that's something everyone can do, I don't know. And had some fun with developing an ink style that I enjoyed. And for a time, thought that was a good direction to go in. But the problem was that unless I found or, shot my own precise photo reference for literally everything, it wouldn't work. It wasn't actually drawing, I was copying. And as soon as I tried to draw, say, the same person, the same character, from a different angle, it just fell apart. I had a go at Mermaid after hearing about it from Megan McIsaac. Some of my sketches were okay, but again, they were all heavily based on photo reference. Even with lots of alteration, and I pushed it, harder than usual to try and come up with new compositions, it still felt like I wasn't able to break out and properly do my own thing. I think it was John Ward, if I remember correctly, who challenged me at some point to draw without using direct digital photo reference, which was when I properly realised that I couldn't. The problem was that I was copying. I was replicating someone else's style, whether a photographer or an illustrator. I was learning some useful techniques about line art and colouring along the way, sure, but if I took the training wheels off, I immediately fell over. Except, secretly, even to my own brain, I had been making progress towards a more distinctive and personal style. I just hadn't recognised it. Or perhaps I'd refused to recognise it. During Mermaid, I'd sketched a much simpler image of a young mermaid sat on a rock in a very cartoony style with a little smirk on her face. It's quite cute. It's effective. I like to call this now big head style. I got some positive feedback from my family on this one, who pointed out that I should do more with big head characters. But that's not my style. I want to draw realistic and moody and dramatic stuff. I resisted it for a long while. I think perhaps I had some deep down prejudice against more cartoon style drawings. The idea that a cartoony style can't be used to tell meaningful and serious stories is, of course, bobbins. You've probably seen some big heads pop up on the newsletter over the last year or so. I'm not the only person to draw characters with big heads, obviously. This isn't an especially unique cartoon approach, but it does feel like an aesthetic that I can keep developing and make my own. trying different shading techniques, figuring out how to use colour, working out how to incorporate dialogue balloons. Telling stories, in other words. It's something I can work with. It comes from my imagination, and I don't need to lean on photo reference. As Gillen pointed out over on Blue Sky, making comics is all about getting the best from an artist's limitations. The more I tinker with the big heads, the more I realise that I can create distinct characters with personalities. I just had to get over myself and embrace a cuter visual style than I had in mind, rather than trying to force myself down an uncomfortable path. The point, if there even is one in today's podcast, is that figuring out your style isn't a linear process. I went through all of this with my writing as well. I just did it decades ago over a very long period of time without really paying attention. It was only when I started writing and publishing serials on a consistent schedule that I finally figured out my writing voice. Pursuing a specific style that you've seen elsewhere likely won't work because you'll just be trying to ape your favourite artists or writers or musicians or what have you. You can't force a style. It has to appear by itself over time. It probably won't be what you expect, and it won't arrive when you want. If you're early in your writing, don't despair if you're struggling to find your voice. It doesn't matter if you're still replicating your favourite authors, and writing fan fiction is an entirely respectable way to learn the craft and figure out who you are. When we're beginners, we copy and we copy, learning piece by piece until one day we find ourselves accelerating away from those early influences and finding our own path. That's the point at which you're your own artist, and it's what distinguishes you from everyone else. In an age of infinite content, it's a vital moment of transition. Time is the primary lever here, as Brad and Dave pointed out in their podcast. There are no magical shortcuts. You can't get to the destination without first going on that journey. Thanks for listening. Leave comments and find more stuff like this over on the newsletter at simonkjones.substack.com. That's where you'll also find my fiction and can leave comments and disagree with me. So yeah, I'll see you over there.